Thank you for watching. Subscribe on Deceived Husbands for more stories. My name is David Walker, and this is the strange story of my marriage. I graduated from one of the top law schools in the country. I got a job with a well-established law firm in Chicago, and I quickly made junior partner and then full partner in record time. It was obvious to everyone at the firm that I was going to be very successful there. I started on a challenging project, and within a week I was in charge of it. Other attorneys and paralegals took their direction from me. One of the paralegals, Jessica Lane, was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. A natural blonde with the deepest blue eyes and a smile that could melt an iceberg. If that wasn't enough, she had an amazing figure. We were both 30 years old when we met. I didn't have to figure out how to approach her because she pursued me. I'm tall and good-looking, but she figured I was on the partner track when we met, and she wanted that. I was just along for the ride. At the end of my first week, Jessica was talking to me and said, "This sure was a busy week. Buy me a drink?" I said, "Sure." I knew I was being pursued, but I wanted to see where this would go. Well, after 2 drinks, it went back to her place where she gave me the greatest Aussie kiss anyone has ever received. I offered to reciprocate, but she said we should save that for next time. I kissed her goodbye and said I'd see her on Monday. Monday was a tough day for Jessica. A very pretty attorney named Rachel spent most of the day with me on an aspect of the case we were working on and was sending out signals that she was interested in me. If I could see it, Jessica saw it, but there was nothing that she could do about it. I had a 6 p.m. meeting with a senior partner to let him know the status of the case. Just before I went into the meeting, I told everyone else that we were done for the day and we would reconvene on Tuesday. I spent an hour in that meeting, and when I returned to my office, 2 women were waiting for me. When you are an attorney and you are not sure what you should do, you do nothing. I walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and looked up at the 2 women who followed me in. No one spoke. Finally, I said, "Well, I'm hungry. Would either or both of you like to join me at the pub downstairs? My treat." Jessica said yes immediately, and Rachel said no and left. That was the way it went for Jessica. She had the looks and body to win every match. After dinner, she reminded me of my Friday offer, so we went back to her place. She excused herself and then called me into her bedroom. She was on her bed, stark naked. Jessica said, "Why don't you get undressed? That is exactly what I did. It was amazing." Jessica then said, "Wow, I didn't expect you to be that good since you were naked. Let's see how good you play around." Well, the nice thing about having a David is that it is easier to satisfy women. I would have stayed with her that night, but then I would have had to go home in the morning, shower, shave, and dress for work. Jessica had a plan. She said she could bring a few things to my place, and that way we could spend the night together. Even though I knew this was her full-court press, I still liked the idea. I certainly wanted to know how it would be to sleep with her, and I mean sleep. We slept together that night, and she woke me up with another great Aussie kiss. By the end of the 2nd week, we were living together. 6 months later, before I showed her the engagement ring, I showed her the prenuptial agreement. She knew she was going to have to sign one because I made it a condition of partnership in the firm. It was my suggestion to the partners that the firm had to be protected from what was going to happen to a large percentage of partners, and part of that protection was a specific section to be included in every prenup. Separate from that was a written chastity belt for each of us. If you are caught cheating, you leave with nothing. You could still play around, but if you're caught, you lose everything. Of course, she signed. She figured she was going to marry some fat-a-hole to get what she wanted. Now she was going to be rich with a man who knew how to play around. She was not going to have to sneak around with the pool boy or the tennis instructor. For her, it was no problem. She even said she would like to have 2 or 3 children. I liked that idea too. It would have been nice to know that she loved me, but I honestly didn't think she did. She certainly liked me. The connection was great. I loved being with her. She never asked for anything crazy. She would suggest vacations to places that sounded great to me. I certainly cared about her, and I hoped she would feel that way about me. 3 months later, we were married and honeymooned in Venice. Our first child was conceived there. I told her that if she wanted to retire and raise the kids, that was fine with me. She even suggested we name our son, when we found out in advance, David Jr. I didn't like that idea. I think a child should have their own identity and not be saddled by their parent. Jessica had no father. Her mother, Susan, was knocked up in high school, similar body style as Jessica, and she raised her all by herself. My dad was a jackass who divorced my mom 20 years ago, and sadly, my mom died when I was in law school. So we decided James was a nice name, and our first child, James Walker, was born with Jessica's mom with us in the delivery room. Susan was in her late 40s, and I asked Jessica if she wanted her mother to live with us. She was so happy when I made that suggestion, so we looked for a new home. We found a large home in the suburbs with 5 bedrooms. Fortunately, the bedroom furthest away from the master also had its own bathroom, so we gave that room to Susan. We wasted no time in our bedroom, and our daughter Elizabeth was born 9 months after we moved in. Jessica was still interested in me since as soon as she got clearance from her doctor after Elizabeth was born, she was ready for some fun. It was a Saturday when she literally said to her mother, "Mom, you watch the kids for a while today. I really need to have David play around with me. It's been weeks." Her mother turned 6 shades of red as Jessica and I went to our bedroom. I turned to her mother and said, "I am sorry, Susan. It must be the hormones. I was just trying to be nice and make her feel better." Susan looked at me and said, "She talks about you physically practically every day, and she's very graphic." Now I was turning red. It did not stop me from having fun with Jessica. We enjoyed ourselves all weekend long. It actually took us a whole month before Jessica got pregnant again. I was starting to wonder if we would have a dozen children. That problem was solved after Emily was born. Jessica decided she had her 3 children and got her tubes tied. I had no problem with that. Our life stayed intense. Jessica worked hard to get her figure back, and with a built-in babysitter, we went out often and acted like newlyweds. I had an ideal life. I had a beautiful wife who was never a problem. Our life was amazing. We had 3 wonderful children who we both loved. I had started calling Susan Mom, which she seemed to like, and the kids adored their grandma. Jessica and Susan never fought over anything. Work was great. I was a junior partner and was on my way to becoming very wealthy. Jessica had a group of women friends from the neighborhood that I approved of. There was not a wacko in the group. They all had successful husbands and they all loved their lives and social status. We socialized with the group and all the husbands were similar. They were hard-working men who loved their families. They never talked about cheating or other women. I was thrilled. Everything was great for the next 20 years. The kids grew up, I was a full partner at work, and my wife kept things exciting. She loved my David. I just was not sure if she loved me. She never said it. When I would tell her that I loved her, she would kiss me and then talk about something else. It bothered me, but I learned to live with it. My only problem was a client at work named Patrick. He inherited his father's company and money, and he was worth about $3 billion. I thought he was an arrogant so-and-so, but he never suggested anything illegal, and the firm made a lot on fees from his business, so I put up with him. He had a tough business negotiation with another company. In the end, I personally saved him about $150 million on the deal, so he was very happy with me, but he despised the head of the other company. Even after the deal was done, the other man, Anderson, had a trophy wife, dyed blonde hair, huge fake jugs, you know what I mean. Patrick decided to take Anderson's wife, Linda, away from him. Well, Anderson was not a billionaire, and Patrick was. To make a long story short, she fell for Patrick. The day after Patrick played around with her, he sent Anderson photos of him playing around with his wife. When Anderson received the photos, he was devastated. He called me. I told him I knew nothing about his wife or the photos. The man was extremely upset, so I offered to take him to lunch. He met me and brought the printed photos with him. I apologized to him. I thought this behavior by my client was completely uncalled for. Of course, Anderson filed for divorce. She did not contest it because she thought she was trading up financially. Sexually, she was trading one for another. I called Patrick to tell him I had met with Anderson and how upset he was. I was hoping to appeal to Patrick's humanity. Apparently, he had none. He was so happy he told me to bill him for my time and the cost of the lunch. I did. The week Linda Anderson's divorce was finalized, Patrick called me for a prenuptial agreement. I had our family relations department handle it. Anderson called me back to invite me to his wife's bridal shower on Friday night. I told him that was usually for women. He told me this one would be different. He was inviting many men who would pleasure the former Mrs. Anderson. I was stunned, to say the least. He said when it was done, I could not speak. I told him that I would not attend and strongly advised him to cancel the event. Later that day, another client of mine called and told me he had just spoken to Patrick, and I would never guess what he just invited him to. I told him I would bet him $1,000 that I could guess. He figured out that I already knew. He said Patrick sent him nude photos of Linda Anderson and he was going. Since he was a client, I advised him about sexually transmitted diseases and advised him against attending. I knew he was married and had met his wife. When I went home that night, I was visibly upset. I hugged my wife. I hugged my kids. I hugged my mother-in-law. I told everyone that I had a very disturbing day at work and that I loved them all very much. I hugged and kissed all of them, and I had tears in my eyes. After dinner, Jessica had her usual solution to things. We went to our bedroom. It took my mind off Linda Anderson, who likely would have the same fate later that week, only many times over. I found out the next Monday just how big a scumsucker Patrick was. First, he sent a video of the entire event to Anderson, then he dumped Linda Anderson. She had some clothes but no cash, no jewelry, nothing. She had 3 suitcases placed on the street corner, and that was that. Legally, she was not entitled to anything. They were never married. He owned or leased the jewelry. That was that. Apparently, Patrick so loved what he did that he was looking for another pair of victims. He found it in the bank vice president who refused what they considered to be a risky loan. My opinion agreed with the bank. Of course, the loan was only half the equation. The bank VP, Mark Stevens, had dumped his wife for a younger model. He married another trophy wife with huge fake jugs but with long jet black hair and 25 years younger. Mark Stevens was probably worth about $25 million. Patrick was still worth billions, had a private jet, multiple homes around the world, wall-to-wall servants. True to form, the day after Patrick played around with Alice Stevens, Mark Stevens received the photos showing Patrick playing around with his wife. Since I was still Patrick's attorney, I got the call from Mark Stevens. He was even more upset than Anderson was. I asked him if he was going to divorce his wife. He said he had a prenup and she was history. I told him what had happened to Linda Anderson. It actually made him feel better. He thanked me, and we hung up. Sure enough, a few months later I got the call from Patrick to attend Alice Stevens' orgy. I politely declined. That same other client contacted me shortly after, telling me he had gotten nude photos of Alice Stevens. He was even more interested in playing around with Alice since she was in her mid-20s. The only drawback was there was going to be more men at this one. I reminded him about STDs and ended the call. The next day, the video was sent to Mark Stevens. He didn't see it until Monday and sent me a copy on Saturday. Alice Stevens' clothing was all packed up in 3 suitcases. She was officially used merchandise. After that, Patrick waited for the next pair of victims. He contacted my firm for our legal opinion on a deal he was working on. He would be sued and lose if we let the deal go through. I told him several changes were required to make it legal. He went ballistic. He informed me in no uncertain terms that either we give our legal approval to the deal or he would pull his business. I went to the firm's managing partner and we held an emergency meeting of the executive committee. In the end, everyone despised Patrick, and we were not going to risk the reputation and viability of the firm on a moronic deal. I was given the task of delivering the bad news. I wondered if Jessica and I were being set up by Patrick to be the third victims of his violation and humiliation. I called him and told him our position. He already had another law firm lined up, and they had already approved it. They must be the dumbest lawyers in town. Now, I had to go home and tell Jessica. Emily was about to graduate high school and join her older siblings at my alma mater, where they had both just finished their first year. Everyone was home, but I did not think this was a family conversation. I waited until after dinner. I asked Jessica to come down to my home office and I closed the door. I first told her the story of Linda Anderson. She was stunned when she heard how it ended for Linda. Then I told her about Alice Stevens. Jessica wanted to know why I told her these stories. I told her Patrick tried to push our firm into backing him in an illegal deal. I met with the rest of the executive committee I am a member, and we all agreed that we would rather lose his business than our reputation. I then had to tell her that I think that Patrick will attempt to do the same thing to her and me. Jessica was pale and she said, "My head is spinning. I need to lie down. The only thing that will help is you playing around with me." So I played around with Jessica's brains out. I think it actually made me feel better since I purposely decided to mention Patrick's little David earlier. I could not compete with Patrick financially, but sexually I was the clear winner. Add to that, we were not poor. Not only was I a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, I was also the clear favorite to become managing director in a few years. Still, the next day I was concerned again. We were attending a charity event Friday night, and I went home for my tuxedo and to drive Jessica and me to the venue. When I saw Jessica in her black and silver evening gown, I got excited. I was starting to worry. Would Patrick be at the event? And was my wife going to advertise herself to this billionaire? When we left the house, both of our sons whistled at their mom. Elizabeth had a comment that cut into me when she said, "Who are you trying to impress, Mom?" I was worried. In the car, I reminded Jessica of the stories I told her about Linda Anderson and Alice Stevens. She laughed and told me not to worry. She said, "I saw how excited you were when you saw me in this dress. I'm looking for more love when we get home tonight." I relaxed again. When we got to the event, Patrick was standing near the entrance. I tried to avoid him, but he came right up to me and said, "David, it's good to see you. No hard feelings about my change in firms, I hope. Who is this absolutely beautiful woman you have with you?" I was not going to answer, but Jessica said, "I'm his wife, Jessica Walker." He continued with the, "Oh, that cannot be right. You are much more valuable than Walker." I interrupted the crap and dragged Jessica away with me. She was upset that I dragged her away. We heard Patrick call out, "Save me a dance, Jessica." Jessica was about to yell at me when I said to her, "Jessica, he is going after you. If you go with him, you will end up like the other two victims. Are you going to throw away your family for that?" She was mad and said, "I'm getting a drink." Patrick saw her walk over to the bar and followed her there. I could not hear what they were saying, but she was smiling and touching his arm. I was sure I had lost her. What was I going to tell the children? I just watched them talking to each other. He would whisper in her ear and touch her. I decided to walk over. At this point, I had nothing to lose. I looked at Jessica and said, "Having fun, dear?" She answered, "Patrick's first name was telling me some very amusing stories." I replied, "Lucky you. He only told me disgusting perv stories." Jessica looked at me and said, "Why don't you get a drink? Patrick and I are going to dance." I followed them to the dance floor and watched him put both of his hands on my wife's butt. I was going to stop her, but she was more into it and whispered in his ear. I could only make out the last two words she said to him, "Play around." I went over, tapped, and saw the crying disaster in the living room. I asked what happened. I suggested Elizabeth calling your mother might not be a good idea. She is not going to say anything you want to hear. You are not going to convince her of anything. She is hoping to marry a 60-year-old billionaire and hopes that she outlives him. Your mom is 48. Maybe she plans on poisoning him. I'll give her a chance. She and I will be divorced in a few months. If he marries her, she's set for life. If not, there are a couple of gallons of misery in her future and probably a few STDs. Elizabeth asked, "So it doesn't bother you anymore, Daddy?" I answered, "Honestly, I think it will bother me until the day I die. However, I have 4 other people to take care of, and they are all more important than I am. So it's time for us to go to IHOP. We are going there for 2 reasons. 1, I want pancakes. And 2, I seriously doubt we will see any billionaires there. Let's go. At IHOP, after we ate, Harry had a question. Dad, I don't want to pry, but I am curious about something. I understand if you would rather not answer. How much are you worth? I answered, let me think. My partnership in the law firm, plus the value of the house, retirement funds, investments, and cash on hand come to about 40 million, maybe more. Harry said, so you do not have to work anymore? I answered, no, I don't have to work, but this year I expect to earn over 6 million. I'm the favorite to be the next managing director. In the next 10 years, I will make another 100 million. When each of you graduates, you will have zero debt, and whatever you choose to do, you will be set up for success. With that, I left a 25 tip, and we went home. I told the kids that I was taking this week off and more if I needed to. A while later, Elizabeth's phone rang. She looked at it and said, it's Mom, what should I do? I said, answer it and say hello. Elizabeth said, hi Mom, what do you want? What's that? Jackson told you that he didn't mean to send those pictures to Dad. Who the hell was he sending pictures of you playing around? I cannot believe how stupid you are. I interrupted Elizabeth, saying, sweetheart, I don't want you getting upset. Your mother's going to keep saying crazy, stupid stuff. It's the only way to justify her actions. Elizabeth, back on the phone, said, yeah, Daddy got me to calm down. At least he cares about us. You sold all of us out for a tiny David and money that you were never going to get. What's that? Are you crazy? I am not going to say that to Daddy. Hold on, let me think about it. Elizabeth says to me, Dad, Mom wants me to say this. I think she's out of her mind, but I guess that's your decision. She says she wants to come and see us on Monday, and when she's here, Elizabeth paused and said, I am sorry, Daddy. She says she wants to have fun with you. I said, please give me the phone. Karen, listen carefully since I am not going to repeat this. As long as they want to see you, you will never be forbidden from seeing your children here. I was going to change the locks, but you left your keys here, so that will not be necessary. If you want your clothes, you can take them with you on Monday. I will not be here Monday morning since I will be filing the divorce papers. I expect to be home by noon. If you are here, you will be served with the divorce papers. In your mind, I am doing you a favor. You cannot marry Jackson if you are still married to me. I honestly wish you luck with that. What's that? You are doing me a favor by not asking for half my net worth. Karen, you signed a prenuptial agreement. Once you play around with Jackson, you lost all rights to anything that used to be ours. Now, as for you and I having fun, that ship has sailed. You and I will never have fun again. Either get used to that little David, get yourself someone on the side, or do without. Whatever you do, I no longer care. That is your problem. What's that? You want the children to live with you? Well, that is out of my control. The children are all over 18. They can live wherever they want. If by some chance you can convince Jackson to let them live in his house, you can ask them yourself. What about your mother? I told her last night that she is an important part of this family, and I made a lifetime commitment to her. It's different from the one you made to me. Mine means something. Same thing applies to Susan as it does to the kids. If you can convince Jackson to let her live in his house, then you can ask her. No, it's different. You're living in his house. We are living in the Walker family house. Goodbye, Karen. Perhaps I will see you on Monday. Here's Elizabeth. Elizabeth said to her mother, well, I'll bet you're really happy with Daddy's answer. By the way, don't waste your time trying to convince Dad to have us live with you. None of us are leaving Daddy. Oh, you want to hear it from each of them? Wait, I will put you on speaker. Yes or no? Do any of you want to live with this dumb witch? Yes, Mom? They all said no. But I'll tell you what, if you can convince Needle Tool to let us live there, have him call us and tell us that, and we will reconsider. I won't hold my breath. So long, loser. Elizabeth hung up the phone. We had a decent Saturday and Sunday. When I left for the office Monday morning, the kids asked if they had to let their mom in if she showed up. I told them I should be back by noon, so they could tell her to come back then. You can always tell her she should have called first. I told them if they were worried, they should call the police and then me. I had already taken care of removing Karen from all the financial matters. I left $500 in our old bank account. Everything else was unavailable to her. Bill, our managing director, had contacted our family law people, and they were ready for me as soon as I came in. I had the papers filed in no time flat. I told them to bill me directly. They said that Bill had told them anything I needed was no charge. I thanked them and left. I got home around 11:15 a.m. Karen was sitting inside Jackson's limo. She came out to greet me and approached me to hug me. I stiff-armed her and she stopped dead in her tracks. I said, "Let me tell the kids I am home, and then I'll let you in." I came in and asked the kids if anyone wanted to serve their mom the divorce papers. Susan said she would do it. What does she have to do? I told Susan to give her this envelope and say, "Karen Walker, you have been served, and then I will take your picture and you will sign a form saying what you did." I opened the door and let Karen in. The kids stood as far away as they could. Susan walked up to her, gave her the papers, and said the phrase. I captured it and we were done. Right after that, Susan slapped Karen in the face and said, "I am ashamed to be your mother." The kids stayed away from her. Karen looked at me and said, "Well, how about you and I go lie down for a while?" I looked at Karen and said, "There are suitcases on the bed for your clothes. Take your things and get out of my sight." I stood in the doorway watching her pack. She looked for her jewelry. I told her I decided to let Elizabeth and Susan have your jewelry. I would mail you anything they do not want. Karen said it was her jewelry. I replied that based on the prenuptial agreement, when she played around with Jackson, she lost the jewelry. I told her if she needed money, she could always sell her engagement ring, which she was not wearing. She told me she did not need money since Jackson was so rich. I told her to have him replace any favorite items. She said that I had given her those items. I told her it couldn't be sentimental value since she never cared anything for me. She was mad now, saying, "How can you say that?" I replied, "Because, my dear, in almost 20 years you never once told me that you loved me." She looked down and continued packing. She finished quickly and I carried her suitcases to the front door. I looked at Karen and said, "I'm not throwing you out. If you want to talk to your children, you can spend as much time as you need." The kids turned their backs to her. She looked at me and had tears in her eyes. I could not resist. I said, "Now you know what it's like to have your heart broken." She had the limo driver get her suitcases, and she was gone. I looked at the family and said, "Anybody want a beer?" We all had one. The boys wanted another. I told them after lunch. So we made sandwiches, and everybody had a second beer. As I sat there, I remembered about the jewelry. I brought out a large box of Karen's jewelry for Susan and Elizabeth to go through. They each saw some things that they liked. Harry asked, "So what are you going to do, Dad?" I said, "About what?" Harry said, "Women, dating." "You're still young, Pop." I replied, "I tell you what, son, why don't you and Jeremy do the dating when it comes to women?" I looked at Elizabeth and said, "I am sorry, sweetheart. You can also date if you want." Elizabeth replied, "I might as well." "I am never going to find a man as good as you were, Dad." I answered, "Nonsense. You are all young. You will find many people in life, and you will pick the right one for yourself." Elizabeth said, "You didn't, Daddy." I replied, "Actually, I did pick the right person. If it wasn't for Jackson going after Mom, we'd still be married." Elizabeth said, "But she didn't love you, Daddy." I said, "Maybe she just needed more time. I don't know." Until Friday night, I did not have one unhappy day with your mother. Listen, all of you, if she calls you, you should talk to her. She is your mother, kids, and your daughter, Susan. Nobody is perfect. Even if they end up married, Karen will still need her family. Elizabeth asked, "What about you, Daddy?" I said, "Karen and I are no longer family. We had a nice summer. Karen spoke to the kids occasionally. She never mentioned them living with her. In September, the kids went back to college. Jeremy had his first year. Harry and Elizabeth started their second. Susan and I drove them back, and I got them a small car to share at school. We said our goodbyes, and I felt awful. Susan noticed, and she said she was worried about me. I said that I would not lie to her. I did not know how I was going to go on without the kids around. We stopped for dinner on the drive home. We had a nice dinner and a very pleasant conversation. When we got back to the car, I said I was grateful that she was with me, and I broke down and cried. It took 15 minutes before I felt I could safely drive. I apologized to Susan. She said that I never needed to apologize to her about anything. We got home late, and Susan said to me, "How about a little scotch?" I asked her, "When did you become a scotch drinker?" Susan said, "I think we both need it." I replied, "I am sorry, Susan. Did I upset you?" Susan answered, "The only thing that upsets me is seeing you in pain." I said, "I love you, Mom." Susan answered, "I love you too, son." So we each had a scotch. Then we had another. Then it hit me. I told her, if I didn't go to bed, I would fall asleep at the dining room table where we were drinking. We each went to our rooms. When I spoke to the kids on the phone, they could tell I was sounding better. I told them that Grandma was a big help to me. I was notified by the court that my divorce would be finalized on the Monday before Thanksgiving. I was working on a major legal case that was going to be the highlight of my career, but this week took my focus. I called my client, who had attended the 2 prior fun fests, on that Monday, and asked if he got the invitation to my ex-wife's event. He was hesitant to speak, so I knew he had. I told him it was okay, and I did not mind. In fact, I convinced him to forward me the invitation. The kids came home on Tuesday, and I asked everyone to sit as I had something important to discuss. When everybody settled down, I continued. I said, "I have some news, and please do not interrupt. My divorce was finalized yesterday." Quiet, please. "I have a client who attended the orgies of the 2 previous women that Patrick humiliated. I convinced him to send me the email invitation he received to your mother's event this Friday night. Patrick calls it a bridal shower. I've printed it out, including the attached photos which Patrick sends out to convince men to show up. Here, see for yourselves." Everyone looked at the email and the photos and said, "Is she crazy? She posed for these photos?" I said, "I doubt she posed for the email. I think Patrick just fed her his usual crap about how beautiful she is and got her to pose nude for him. I hate to ask you, Elizabeth, but you have had the most communication with your mother. Would you call her and see if she will meet you so you can show this to her? I do not think she would see me or believe me. Obviously, this has to be before Friday night. If you meet her somewhere else, I will ask you to take your brothers with you. I'd be worried about your safety outside the house," Elizabeth said. "I'll call her right now." "Hi, Mom. We're all home for the holiday. Listen, Mom, I have a problem. No, I can't talk about it over the phone. I really need to see you. If you cannot come here, I can meet you somewhere. The boys also want to see you too, so they'll be with me. No, Saturday is no good. I really need to see you immediately. I can't talk to anyone else about this. I really need you, Mom. Tomorrow would be great. Of course, you can come here. That's up to you. I'll tell Daddy to leave if you don't want to see him." "Oh, you do want to see him? Okay, I'll tell him. He will be here and he will be nice. Don't worry. So what time tomorrow?" "Great. We will see you tomorrow around 11 a.m. Thanks, Mom. Bye." The kids were happy when we said goodnight. Susan and I had a talk for a moment. I asked, "Are you upset over the email I showed tonight?" Susan said, "I know it's crazy, but it reminded me of when I was assaulted. That's what's going to happen to Karen." She started to cry. I hugged Susan and said, "With the kids' help, we're all going to try to keep that from happening." The kids were up and prepared for the showdown to save their mom. At 11 a.m., the doorbell rang. Elizabeth opened the door and said, "Hi, Mom. Thanks for coming. Please come in and sit down in the kitchen. I have a big problem, Mom. It's your blindness. Patrick sent out this email on Monday. Please read it." Karen said, "This isn't real. Who made this up?" Elizabeth said, "Mom, here are the pictures he sent with it." Karen asked, "Where did you get these from?" Elizabeth said, "Mom, Patrick sent them with the email. You know he took those of you. He's setting you up to get even with Daddy. He's a perv scumsucker who did this to 2 other women before you. On Friday night, you are going to be the 3rd. He waits until the divorce is final and then ruins you by sending a video of your destruction to Daddy on Saturday. Daddy has a copy of the video Patrick sent to Alice Stevens' husband, Mom. He's going to humiliate you." Karen said, "So, David, you and I are now divorced. Are you saying you will take me back and remarry me?" I decided to lie to save her life and said, "Karen, I would. We're trying to save your life." Karen stood and said, "No, you're not. You want to save your father. cheat me out of marrying a billionaire. Nice try. Karen ran to the door and left. The kids ran after her. We could hear the kids yelling at Mom's car. I could see the car driving away. They came back inside, clearly upset. I said, I am sorry, kids. I just told Susan that I lied to your mom to try to save her. I was going to lock her in the house, but Patrick knew she was here, and the driver would testify. I would go to jail, and Patrick would do even worse to her. Elizabeth said, what's worse than what he's going to do? I said, tell her they're going somewhere romantic on his jet, drug her, and sell her to a Mexican house. There are worse things than that, too. Elizabeth asked, when did you know she was lost? I answered, when I saw how she dressed for the charity event, I was worried. I thought about faking illness and not going, but Patrick would have found a way. When I saw the way she was hanging on him at the event, I knew she had decided to trade up to a billionaire. I added, Elizabeth, I thought you were convincing her for a moment earlier, but she thinks she has a chance to be Mrs. Jackson. If on Friday they walk into a room and see many men ready to play around with her, she will think if she does this, he will marry her. Elizabeth asked, what are we going to do? I replied, well, when they dump her on the sidewalk on Saturday with her luggage, eventually I think she will call you. When she does, ask her where she is, and I will pick her up and bring her to a clinic for STD testing. Then I'll put her in the motel near the highway so you can visit her after we get the STD test results, but not before. I started looking for a small house near here where she can live. I'll get her a small car, and I'll pay her basic overhead. I will not let her live in this house unless all 4 of you demand it. Elizabeth said, thank you, Daddy. You're still paying her phone bill, aren't you? I said, yes, I am. I didn't think Patrick was going to get her a phone, so we had a very subdued Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. In front of the kids and Susan, I called my client who gave me the email invite Friday midday and told him that I did not mind that he was going on Friday night, but I warned him that if any harm comes to Karen, I won't sue him, I will kill him. I told him to call me when it is over, no matter what time it is. We sat around watching TV on Friday night. We were all miserable. At midnight, I got the phone call. He told me it was done. I thanked him and hung up. I told the kids, and Susan and Elizabeth cried. Jeremy looked very upset. Harry got up and started pacing around the room. He was as mad as I'd ever seen him. I walked over to Harry, hugged him tightly, and said, I know, son, I know. He broke down and wailed. Everyone came over to hug Harry. Even the oldest child sometimes needs a hug. I suggested we all have 1 shot of scotch. Everybody had 2. It was late. I told Elizabeth to make sure her phone was fully charged. We all went to bed. I woke on Saturday and checked my work email for Patrick's email and video. It was there waiting for me. I took a quick scan of the video, and Karen went along with everything. When the kids got up, I told them I got the video, did a quick scan, and it was what we expected. I said I did not know what time he dumps the women, but I think we will hear before noon. At 11 a.m., Elizabeth's phone rang. It was Karen. I told her to put it on speaker. Karen said, you were right. You were right about everything. I was so stupid. I said, you're on speaker, Karen. We're all here. Tell me where you are, and I'll come and get you. Karen said, Mom, would you please come with David to get me? I'm in front of the Hilton. I said, we're on our way. We didn't say much in the car. We drove up to the hotel, and Karen was sitting on her luggage. I pulled the car up next to her and started loading the trunk. Susan got out, opened the back door, and Karen got in. I called the kids and told them we got her. Karen said, thank you for coming. I know you didn't have to. I am lucky I had the phone. You're still paying the bill, aren't you? I said, that's right. Karen said, so whose room will I be in? I said, you're getting ahead of yourself. Our first stop is a clinic to have you tested for STDs. Karen said, I don't have any diseases. I said, oh, really? Did you get a health certificate from all the men who played around with you last night? I said, one of the men who was there called me last night and told me what happened. Still, if you don't believe that, I guess we can watch the video that Patrick emailed me this morning. Karen started crying and saying, I am sorry, I am sorry. I said, well, that's a start. Remember to apologize to our children. After we go to the clinic, I am putting you up in the motel near the highway by the house. You cannot have contact with the children until you get a clean bill of health. After that, you have no money and have been out of the job market for 20 years. So either I support you or you go down the drain." Karen asked, "So after I get a clean bill of health, I can come home?" I said, "I told everyone that I would buy you a small house near us and get you a small car. The only way I would allow you to live in the family home is if all four of them demand it." Karen asked, "So Mom, what do you think?" Susan said, "Honestly, I would have been happy if you died last night. Maybe you still will. We all would be better off without you. However, I am learning from David. If the children demand it, I will go along. You know, he told his client who was there last night that if any harm came to you, he would kill him." Karen said, "When I said share before, I meant that you get first dibs." I said, "I am glad I am not a part of this decision. I tell you what, Karen, the day that I am a billionaire, then I'll play around with you. Now shut up, you spoiled witch." We went to the clinic. The results would be mailed to Karen at my home address. Then we set her up in the motel. The kids met us there to say hi and see how she looked. They kept their distance as I requested. Karen said she hoped they would want her to live in the house. The kids brought her some food, and finally we all left. When we went home, Harry was very upset. He said, "I can't believe that scumsucker is getting away with this." I said, "Well, what he did is immoral, but none of it is illegal, so I can't go after him for that." Harry said, "But you are going to get him, aren't you, Dad?" I said, "I have something in the works, but I cannot say anything until about the end of next week. I promise I will call all of you when I can." The kids went back to college on Sunday. They stopped to say goodbye to their mom. We got Karen's STD results, and she had syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea. I called my client and gave him the news. He had better be tested as well as anyone he has had contact with since Friday. When we showed Karen the report, she was stunned. Then she was mad. We took her to a doctor who prescribed all the required drugs, which I also had to pay for. There is no medical coverage for ex-wives. At the end of the week, I filed a class action against Patrick personally, his corporation, and the law firm that certified the deal that started the whole mess with Karen. I expected somewhere between 2, 5, and 3, $5 billion in damages. When the case is finalized, that could take 2 years, but I requested that the court seize all of his tangible assets. The law firm imploded immediately. Their assets were seized as well. I doubt any lawyer with that firm would ever be hired as an attorney again. When I called the kids on Friday and gave them all the news, they were not surprised about Mom's diseases, but they were thrilled about Patrick. "He is headed to the poorhouse," Harry asked me. "How much of his money are you going to get?" I told him it was too soon to tell, but I expected somewhere between 350 to 500 million for me personally and the same amount for my law firm, to which I was going to end up as the new managing partner sometime next year. They still wanted to see Patrick dead, but I told them that this hurt him much more. Both Stevens and Anderson called me the next Monday to thank me for what I was doing to Patrick. That only left one problem. Where was Karen going to live? We left that issue for Christmas vacation. When the kids came home, they told me that Karen had been pressuring them to let her come back to the house. In the meantime, I had purchased a one-bedroom bungalow near our house. I had also leased a Toyota Corolla for Karen to drive. She asked for her old car, but I told her that it belonged to Susan now. When the kids came home, I showed them the bungalow. They asked if they could show it to Karen by themselves. I gave them the key, and I left. The kids called us and said they were going to move Karen into her new home. Thanks for watching. What do you think about David's decision to still help Karen after everything she did? Should he have cut her off completely? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more intense stories.